This is a 2x2, but one thing that you might not have considered about a 2x2 is that it's an origin cut puzzle. Origin cut basically just means that all the cuts go through the origin or the very middle of the puzzle. There are many origin cut puzzles out there, such as the 2x2, the Scube, and this thing, the Shangshao 2-layer pentahedron. Origin cut puzzles are often of interest to puzzle designers as they can sometimes be very complex to design. For example, the little chop and the big chop are notoriously difficult to make, and a successful big chop has yet to be made if I recall correctly. Many deep cut puzzles are surprisingly complex, despite having very few external pieces visible in most cases, and oftentimes patterns start to form in like the patterns on the faces. For example, one thing that I think is super cool about deep cut platonic solids is that each platonic solid has one deep cut axis system that makes it look like a cube on all the faces, if that makes any sense. The puzzle that I wanted to make was a deep cut version of a face-turning pentagonal prism, aka this thing right here, and the deep cut version of this puzzle is called the Prismino Crystal. As far as I'm aware, the first and only other person to make one of these was kequals. He uploaded it to Thingiverse and added a warning that it was very unstable. I cannot confirm or deny this as I've never tested it, so print at your own risk. At first, I thought the best way to make one of these would be to just create a floppy Pyraminx crystal, which I ended up doing separately, and just add layers to the top and bottom like square one rails. Now, a floppy Pyraminx crystal actually does require a more complex mechanism than it looks in of itself, and this is where I get into what a shells mechanism is. So for those who don't know, a shells mechanism is basically just a way to stack mechanisms on top of each other of different puzzles to allow deeper cut puzzles to be made. The example I'll give is the Master's Cube. This puzzle turns by the corners, but you obviously can't score the corners directly into the core or the other corners would like not be able to move. So the way that a Master's Cube mechanism is made is by taking a ready cube that's all these pieces would be hidden, and then these edges extend into these edges, which can be made because these edges move the same way as these edges, and then these edges are actually holding in all of the pieces on the cube. Does that make sense? No? Well, too bad. Anyway, in this case, a floppy Pyraminx crystal does require shells because the point that it turns around also can get moved by other turns, so we actually need to build a floppy Megaminx shell underneath it. So then we just need to add another shell on top of this that holds these crystal edges in and also hides these edges and centers. And funnily enough, this sequence of shells is actually very similar to going from a Megaminx to a Pyraminx crystal, because on a Megaminx, the corners are also holding in the outer edges and the inner edges and centers get hidden. It's the same thing, basically. So that was why I made one of these last year. I know I said at the time that I would make another puzzle based off of this. It was the Prismino Crystal. Life got in the way, so it took a while. Anyway, there was another way I could have made this puzzle that I'll get to in a minute, but I chose this option at first because it required much fewer pieces than the alternative, and boy did it suck. So this is the version that used a Prismino Crystal inner shell, and it's not great. First of all, you'll notice right off the bat that I used curvy cuts on this. I did this because all the angles of these pieces are all the same, and because I'm using square one rails, if I actually didn't use curvy cuts, then it would be allowed to shapeshift like a pentagon equal, so the curved cuts were actually a way of preventing shapeshifting. But did it actually prevent the puzzle from shapeshifting? Kinda? I mean, you can't really make turns from here without breaking something, so I would say so, but I cannot consider this to be a finished puzzle and take it seriously. It's rattly as hell, turns like crap as you can see. These layers, you gotta have like a flat surface to get it aligned most of the time. I printed the inner shell in white because I thought it wouldn't be visible. It is visible. And I used alignment pegs for these edge pieces to make it easier to print and didn't actually make them tight enough, so that can happen. So after that, it was safe to say that the floppy Pyraminx crystal method is a bust. So I decided to try the other option I had for a mechanism, which was to actually use an inner full face-turning pentagonal prism shell underneath and just bandage it so that only one of the pentagonal faces could turn. And then of course these inner corners would hold in the edges on the outside. And that worked quite well. Here's the finished product. It turns very well. You know, for a shells puzzle, much better than I expected. This is my first ever 3D shells puzzle, and I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. I don't know how well you can see in there, but this really is like a full pentagonal prism mechanism inside the cube. And now that I've showed you this, I can show you another cool pattern I found of origin cut face-turning prisms, which is that the top and bottom faces of all origin cut face-turning prisms will always look like a Pyraminx crystal version of that shape, if that makes sense, while the rectangular faces have like a 2x3 kind of pattern on them. Another fun property of all odd face-turning prisms is that the rectangular turns can be made with simple deep cuts, while the even ones require complex deep cuts. You probably don't know what that means if you're watching this, so I'm going to get into that now. Basically, simple deep cut just means that you can have hooks and rails going from one piece directly into another adjacent visible piece, without any collisions. That's also a term that you may not understand if you're not a puzzle designer, so I'll do my best to explain it. If you have a better definition, please stick it in the comments and I'll pin it. But a cube is a really good example of this because it is a simple origin cut puzzle. In this case, you have alternating piece types from corners and centers. Now you'd think that they would actually collide when you do this, but the nice thing about a cube is that these centers actually have an even number of sides. So if you've seen a cube mechanism, you'll know what I mean by this. The centers act as edges, half of the corners act as corners, and the other half act as centers that are screwed into the core. This is true of this cube, as you know. The hooks in the mechanism only have to go one way because it's essentially a Jinx Pyraminx mechanism. So in a cube, you don't actually need a master layer in between. However, on a 2x2, this is not the case, so this is a complex origin cut puzzle. There is no way to make a 2x2 without any space in between the pieces for the middle 3x3 layer. You cannot just hook the corners directly into each other or the mechanism won't work out. Of course, there are also edge cases to this. For example, the 2-layer pentahedron actually has some simple origin cuts and one complex origin cut. This is the complex one because you need this middle layer here. You can't hook the pieces directly into each other or it won't work out. However, since these corners and edges are alternating piece types that never really touch each other from the sides, you can hook the edges directly into the corners without a piece in between, so that is considered simple origin cut. And the Prismino Crystal also has this property where the rectangle face turns are considered simple origin cut and the pentagonal face turns are complex because it involves this hidden middle layer. Another fun side effect of simple origin cuts is that with simple origin cut, you can actually make the puzzles curvy and have it still exist. That's why these were able to be curvy. While with complex origin cuts, you can't do that, which is why this slice layer is not curvy. And that's also why you'll never see any 2x2 curved shape mods, because if you try to make a 2x2 curved, it will be extremely limited in how it can scramble, and it can't really be considered a puzzle. Cubes Made Easy actually did try to make curvy 2x2s to try to go into more detail on this concept, so I'm going to link that video in the description if I remember to. But enough puzzle theory, you came here for the actual puzzle. It has 42 pieces, only 20 of which are visible, and this is my first ever, non-floppy, shells puzzle that I've designed. I'm super happy with how it turned out. I think I under-lubed it a little bit, which is why it sounds dry on these turns, but I think it's fine overall. These turns are great. These I think are perfect. As per usual, I used Oracal 6510 fluoro shades for red, green, yellow, and orange, and Oracal 651 shades for purple, blue, and white. And I put a lot more work into this than I do for most of my puzzles, if I'm being honest. For example, I'm pretty sure I assembled my floppy Pyraminx crystal right off the print bed, but for this one, I put hours of work into post-processing the pieces, and it all led to it turning incredibly well, so the hard work paid off. This has been a very rewarding project to work on. I've wanted one of these in my collection for, I'm pretty sure, a couple years now. So anyway, now's the part where I scramble it because I don't know what else to do with the video. So here goes. Alrighty then, that looks just about scrambled enough to me. I've already done several solves of this puzzle, so I won't mind solving it, but I am going to do it off camera just because I do not feel like editing a solve video right now. Thank you so much for watching this video. If I were you, I would subscribe and turn notifications on for future videos so I find out where I can get my hands on one of these. Wink wink nudge nudge. For this video, I took a slightly different approach to usual. Like, I went into the puzzle theory behind the puzzle before actually showing the puzzle itself. So if you enjoyed that, comment. If not, comment. This is a bit different from what I do with my normal videos, so I'd love to hear your feedback. And on that note, this is Lord of the Cubes, signing off.